Welcome back, all of you. I just wanted everybody to know that, at least in my mind, it's important to let everybody know that when Mike stood up here right before lunch and gave the regrets of the DNI, that was just not something to say. What Mike didn't tell you, and what I will tell you, is the reason Tom Finger is coming back is not only does he want to be here because this is his show, and as he told you yesterday, the reason he wasn't going to be here is because he had to cover for the DNI on the Hill. But it's because the DNI specifically asked him to come back here and to rearrange things because, and I have just talked right during lunch to somebody from the DNI's office who wanted to ensure me that the DNI, this was a hard thing for the DNI to make the decision on to not come here, but that there's, the world happens, as we all know. And as things develop and events happen, that's why you have a DNI. I mean, that's what this is all about. That's the risks you take, and that's the type of thing that we're hoping the DNI will be there to do. So I wanted to just mention that because I think Tom's arrival here is going to be something that I think he'll carry a message from the DNI that I think you'll appreciate. Also, as Mike said, we have a interesting panel coming up, and I really do want to thank ahead of time and credit these individuals for being willing to do this. But in the true sense and fashion of spidem, Mike and I waited till they had a few drinks last night, and then we approached them, and before they knew what was happening, we got them convinced. But really, it is, some of you I know had some angst when you first heard about, there's going to be media in the room. How's that work? Boy, talk about countercultural. Oof. But the fact is that today, in today's environment, with the type of information resources we're talking about, with the type of analysis that has to be done, the fact is that in this era of terrorism and homeland security and everything else, public opinion and media opinion tends to be important. Not just in terms of the, who's at fault, he said, she said, whatever. That's the easy reporting. Anybody can do that. The orangutan that I had up on the screen in my presentation can do a simple media piece on gee, something went wrong, and let's go find the accountable person and make them accountable. It takes a lot more, I think, to do serious reporting on intelligence, because what I've found is that those who are really serious about what we do and are really trying to figure it out, more times than not, are very serious in a way that, although we may not see it as helpful to begin with, ultimately is in terms of making the public understand that intelligence is, quite frankly, a necessary evil of a democracy. I mean, at the end of the day, intelligence is our first line of defense to keep the rights and freedoms that we all enjoy, and that for example, Al-Qaeda capitalized on prior to 9/11 or on 9/11. So I think having the media here is a key component to understanding analytic outreach and the challenges and open source, and a lot of things like that. So I do credit these individuals for now being willing to sit up here and talk about what they've heard and their response, and talk about a few other issues like open source. And we also have another individual who stepped up, and we really appreciate that, and that's going to be the moderator of this panel, and many of you know him. It's Louis Andre. Louis retired a few months ago from DIA as executive director of DIA. Wonderful background in history in Army and in Intel. And we thank him very much for agreeing to moderate this panel. So I'm not going to stand here anymore. I'm going to ask the panel to come up and Louis to take this position, and I hope you enjoy it and keep the questions coming in. And again, remember, you can either stand up, raise your hand, and we'll get to you with a mic, or have them right here on the blog site. All right? Thank you.
Two corrections while they're miking up. One, I was the chief of staff, not the executive director, although I always sought to be like the man I admired most in the intelligence business, Gordon Negus, who was the executive director of DIA, the last executive director we had. The position was abolished. And he was a guy who, in my mind, was the consummate analyst, something that I always aspired to be. And second of all, intelligence is not a necessary evil, it's a necessary good. When Tim and Mike asked me if I would step in and moderate this, I had no warning other than just before lunch. I thought to myself, how could a guy who's just written a book on analysis that's yet to be published, but soon to be published, look for it in your bookstore, not take the opportunity to hawk that book to several hundred people who care about the art of analysis? In introducing the panel, let me say a little bit about that book that you need to buy when it comes out in your bookstore. It's not a book, frankly, that you'll see on the New York Times bestseller list or any list like that. It's really a tradecraft book that was meant to be a leave behind for a profession that's been very good to me. All I ever wanted to be in the intelligence business was an analyst. And had they left me alone and not kept kicking me into management positions, I'd probably still be in the government, quite frankly. So it's not about tradecraft with a capital T. It's about one small part of tradecraft. That is when the scientific methods fail us and we have to move into what I call the art of analysis. I've addressed that particular part of it because in my mind, analysis at its heart, it's pretty simple. It's not really complicated. I've heard a lot of really good things over this last day and a half that hearten me, but you know, it's really, we shouldn't over-engineer it. It is really a combination of evidence on one hand and assumptions on the other to make an inference, okay? On the evidentiary side, and excuse me, John and the other lawyers in the audience, I'm using the term a little bit liberally. It's sensors, human and technical, pick up things, results in a body of facts, observations, deceptions, there's positives and negatives and so on. And that constitutes the evidentiary base. It should sound familiar to my panelists. The intellectual input, on the other hand, is what we bring to it as analysts, based on our education, our training, our biases, our culture, our fluency, and so on. We look at that evidence through a prism of a set of assumptions. When we do that, then we make an inference. That inference, or that inferential leap, can be very tiny, or it can be very large. I view analysis as being really in three levels, and that is descriptive, where we're simply reporting what's been collected and kind of tying a product bow around it. Descriptive and evaluative, where we're making a comment about not only what was seen or observed or reported, but how credible and relevant it might be. That is where, in my mind, 90% of the analytic product in today's IC kind of stops. If one has to go further to the level of interpretive analysis, where we not only describe what was seen and collected, but we make an inferential leap that's much larger and tell the customer what it means, why he or she ought to care. And if we have to create not just knowledge, but foreknowledge, that's what's likely to happen next. Then we're making a larger inferential leap and going into the interpretive sphere. So my book is about when one must take an inferential leap because of the quality or lack thereof of the evidentiary base, fragmentary, ambiguous evidence, for example, or we're delving into matters of the future, then how does one make that leap with greater precision and confidence? That's what it's all about. Now, I consider myself a student of the news media, a junkie, in fact. I've I love reading the news, all matters, world news, politics, local news, and so on. And I've watched the art and science of journalism evolve over the last 30 years in some positive ways and in some not so positive ways. One of the things, though, that I'd like to point out is that as I've watched the intelligence community analysts kind of fall back from the level of interpretive analysis that was done previously to devolving, in my mind, to more descriptive and evaluative, I've seen the journalism world go the other way. That more and more they depart from the solid evidentiary base, make an inferential leap, and do interpretive analysis. That's both good and bad, depending on whether you're a skeptic or a cynic. So my question to the panel, and what I'm really doing is buying time so you guys can crank up the really hard questions while I'm giving you that time, is we've laid out over the last day and a half some kind of an evidentiary base. That evidence is mixed with some opinion, with some deception, hopefully not too much deception, but probably a little bit of deception. Some of it's ambiguous and it's certainly fragmentary. Now you're going to go back and you're going to apply your set of assumptions against what you've seen here. You're going to make some inferential leap and you're going to write about this. You're going to report about it. So what I'd like to do as you introduce yourself, think about that, and what the audience here will do is probably question you about the assumptions, how you form those, and how you bring those to bear against what you've heard today or what you've observed previously in the intelligence community. Now, I just met these gentlemen a couple of minutes ago, so I'm not going to try to introduce them myself. I'm going to turn it over to them, and we can go from this end down.
Okay, I'll be the guinea pig here. I'll start out, I guess. I'm Shane Harris. I'm the Intelligence and Homeland Security correspondent for National Journal, which is a weekly magazine in Washington. I guess if I were to answer your question and sort of going to reflect on what my impression has been, absorbing a lot of the content and hearing the speeches over the past day or so, I came into reporting on intelligence and homeland security really after 9/11, and before then was doing reporting mostly in the area of what you would call sort of the reinventing government movement. I mean, people in this room probably remember a lot about that. You had, especially in the area of procurement and acquisition reform. And so I won't tell the story of how I segued off of that into Intel. I can talk about that later if you want to know. But it strikes me that a lot of this sort of themes of transition and change and transformation and the sort of almost evangelical nature that has to go along with that if people are going to be, to use the phrase, change agents, is sort of reminiscent of what we were hearing in the mid to late 90s when there was talk about, changing government regulations to make government more like a business, to make it more efficient, to make it reflect what some people thought was a more efficient operating model in the private sector. So, a lot of that kind of same, passion, it seems really evident here. And I have to say I've been pretty impressed overall with the openness. I mean, we were sort of talking about this over the, before the panel started, and the fact that there are this many of you in one room having an unclassified discussion in a public forum, and that we're actually here, and it's all on the record, and we're able to go write about this and use this material, is sort of noteworthy to me in and of itself. It's not what you would traditionally expect from the realm in which you're dealing. So that in and of itself, I think, certainly from my perspective as a journalist covering this, is a positive thing. But I do sort of try and see this in terms of where are you all trying to go as a movement? Who's leading that? We're hearing from the people obviously today who really want to change. There are obviously going to be some obstacles, and you seem to be pretty frank and candid about what they are. But for me, just personally, I mean, we've sort of heard strains like this before, and I'm sort of, as I'm listening to this, trying to understand how is this new, how is this different, and really kind of what are the chances of success? I mean, the real question ultimately is can this be carried through into the next administration? Can this be made policy so that it lasts, so that the people who perhaps come in and replace some of you don't reverse it? Not that they necessarily would for any particular reason, but it could happen. Things could sort of go the other way. So but overall, I mean, I think that I've been really impressed by the level of attention and commitment that people are giving to this, and it does strike me as something new, definitely.
I'm Tim Starks. I also cover intelligence, but for Congressional Quarterly. For those who don't know what Congressional Quarterly is, it's not quarterly, although it once was. We have a daily publication and a magazine as well. We also have a website. I filed something about the conference this morning for our website. So the focus tends to be on Congress, so that part is accurate. But within that world, usually intelligence, from a day-to-day basis, what Congress is doing on intelligence. For the magazine and for the website, less so. Anything goes really on the intelligence beat for the magazine. I cover intelligence because I had been covering Homeland Security, and there was a thing that I was noticing that while I thought it was important that our chemical plants actually be protected and things like that, ultimately it needed to maybe be stopped a step sooner, and that the people who would do that would end up being the intelligence world. So I looked at that as a more important piece in national security, and because 9/11 was a big deal for me and for everyone in America, I was inspired to cover national security. So that goes back a few steps. I do think that some of what we do is similar to what some of you do. There is a lot of analysis that goes into what I do every day. There is a lot of attempt to predict, because that's kind of some of our customers, if you will, or readers, are people who want to know what's going to happen with this policy, what's going to happen with this initiative. And I do have to kind of put my best, I don't want to say the word guess, because first off, it's something like a spidey sense. You know, the tingling maybe sends me in this direction, but there's also a lot of evidentiary collection that I then use to form my basis of what I anticipate is likely to happen. And I use all the same caveats that you use. Anticipated, likely that, all those kinds of things. I'm also been impressed with some of the things I've been hearing. Among them, the passion and I think in particular the recognition of what the problems are. At least some of them. There's a good recognition, for instance, of what the new personnel in the analyst community means for analysis overall, and how long it takes to train someone to be good at this. Those are all really important points. I think the thing that I'm not hearing, that I know that there are people out there who are thinking about this as well, are a lot of the how do you get to that, as opposed to here's our initiative, here's our end goal, here's an interesting and innovative program like Razor or like Intellipedia. All of those things are pretty impressive ideas and could work. But it seems that there's going to need to be a lot of focus on how do you get there. A lot of the discussions about how do you reward good behavior and how do you punish bad behavior. There's not been as much focus on what do you do about punishing bad behavior, but it is a question that everybody seems focused on. I mean, a lot of the problems that you guys are confronting right now are the same problems that have been problems since the dawn of intelligence. So it seems that from the standpoint of what I've been interested in following is when I hear someone say how, because a lot of the things that have been said about what the end goals are, I've heard and I've gotten that message loud and clear. And where you are now, I've gotten a good idea. But that middle step, which is it's kind of unsexy, of course, because it's bureaucratic, but it's maybe the most important part. How does a DNI, who is supposed to be in charge of everything, how does the DNI make people cooperate? How does the DNI's office do what it was intended to do? The middle managers, apparently, I don't know if there are any middle managers out there, but you guys can't be feeling too good right now. What is the? I would love to talk to some of you if you're around, because I'm interested in what it is that is the concern. What is the problem with change? Everybody seems to agree it needs to happen. Analysts are, I think their reputation's probably on the rise, judging at least by the way Congress responds to the national intelligence estimates that get put out. I mean, they treat these things like they're very, very meaningful, and they should be. But you're still coming from a place where people are still thinking about what went wrong in Iraq and what analysts thought was happening there and what wasn't. And they're going to a place where they need to be, where they have that trust. And all of these things really matter. And I've enjoyed the conference so far. Congress doesn't tend to focus on analysis that much. They tend to focus on how are we collecting enough information, and how are we collecting it? They're very focused on the ethics of interrogation and things like that. So I do interact with the analysis issue pretty frequently, but not as much as I might if Congress was more interested in it. And at a certain point, it seems that you've got to think not just about how do we make these programs happen, but how do you make it so that analysis is so valued within the intelligence community that everyone who seems to recognize that it's the heart and soul of the intelligence community where they behave like it is, as opposed to just recognizing it, saying it, and then going back to focusing on, to use, this is decades ago and maybe happening now, who knows, go back to what dictatorship in South America is going to be toppled. All that stuff is pretty interesting, obviously, and important, but the big issue of how do analysts become everything that people think they should be is interesting to me as well. Those are a few random thoughts.
Hi, is this on? My name's Jonathan Landay. I work for a very large newspaper company that most of you probably have never heard of. We're called McClatchy. We used to be known as Knight Ridder. I've been doing this for about 10 years here in Washington. I spent 10 years overseas as a foreign correspondent in South Asia, in the Balkans, and I do continue to travel quite extensively to places that my wife and my son wish I wasn't going. But I think that's a necessary part of this job. I've been impressed similarly with the openness and the willingness to have this discussion in front of the media. I think it's a really good sign. But one of the things that has struck me is the fact that you're still, the intelligence community is still debating this issue and how you deal with it 4 years after perhaps the biggest or the biggest intelligence failure since Pearl Harbor, and that was the pre-war intelligence on Iraq. And this sort of gives me an opportunity to kind of toot my own horn in that it was my reporting and the reporting of my partner, Warren Strobel, before the war were the only ones who were saying, no, the intelligence is not what we're being told it says. It's being exaggerated, it's being cherry-picked. And I keep saying to myself, how come that Warren and I were able to start writing this 8 months before the invasion of Iraq, and not only were the rest of the mainstream media not writing this, but the intelligence community was producing what it was producing, and I got to put to the side the question of the links with between Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden, which the CIA got very right from the very start. And I'm trying to think about, aside from the questions of politicization and everything else, how it is that this happened when Warren and I basically sat down, and we don't have access to top secret, we didn't have access to top secret information. We were given the charge by our boss to look at the question of Iraq, the consequences of an invasion, and the questions that were being raised about, do they have WMD? What would be, do they have links with Al-Qaeda? And the body of knowledge in the open that was available to us was just extraordinary. I got the charge to do the WMD part of this. As I said, the data that was available in the open source to just Google was just extraordinary. All of the UN, the reports by the UN inspectors, analysis of the analyses, even the interrogation of Hussein Kamal, Saddam Hussein's son-in-law, who is in charge of the whole business, was available on the internet for anybody who wanted to go out and find it. Now, certainly one can say, well, how do you know he wasn't lying? Well, if you know anything about defectors, they don't disclose everything they know in the very first interrogation with the UN, and which is indeed what he did, which raises the question as to, well, if he wasn't telling the truth, most defectors like to stretch things out, embellish things. In fact, this man was saying we got rid of it all right in the very first interview he did with the head of the UN inspectors. There's a ring of truth to that. And so based on that, and based on just sitting back and saying, now wait a minute, we're being asked to accept the following, that Saddam Hussein, with the UN having gotten rid of everything that they could find in the WMD part of this, we're being and being kicked out basically at the beginning of 1999. How is it that he was able to? We're being asked to believe that he reconstituted all of this in 3 years at a time when We've got virtually every electronic asset we possibly can muster watching his country. Is he able to do that while we're doing that? It just didn't ring true. Based on that, and then based on going to sources, we were able to put together this picture that was very, very different from what the administration was telling the American people, which leads me to the final point I'll make. And perhaps our advantage was this, that we weren't just collectors, and that's what we are. We're journalists, we're collectors, but we're also analysts. We do both. We collect the information, and then we try and put it together in a cogent way that makes sense that our readers can understand. I've spent 20 years now in the field. Spent a lot of time in Iraq, spent a lot of time in Afghanistan, beginning in 1985. Warren, my partner, spent a lot of time in Iraq, and we sat back and we looked at what we were being told, and we fed on the experience that we had, what we had seen ourselves, what we had collected ourselves both in the field and back in Washington, and we said, this doesn't make sense. And so perhaps and I know that you're now talking about this, is sending analysts out into the field, sending analysts out to sort of see what collectors are doing. I know there's been a lot of that going on for a while. My question is, how advantageous is that when the fact is that even when the analysts who go out in the field basically stay within the confines of the security bubble, within the confines of the green zone, within the confines of Kabul or Bagram or Kandahar, don't you really need to take this further? Perhaps we as journalists have gotten much further. Perhaps we're the paradigm you want to look at when you're talking about how do we improve analysis. Perhaps, and we don't have access to all of the kinds of computational tools that you all have, or that American intelligence analysts have access to. We have what we have, which is basically Google, our eyes and ears, and what our sources tell us.
I'm Mark Mazzetti. I'm a national security correspondent for the New York Times. I've been covering the intelligence world for about a year and a half, and before that I was covering the Pentagon for 5 years. I want to thank everyone for having us up here. I want to say, first of all, that in the media world we have our own version of middle managers resistant to change. We call them editors. And you know, we all struggle a lot of times with the same things that you struggle with. I understand also we were certainly not the first choice for this panel. There was a congressman, and then apparently last night they were frantically trying to get a comedian to come in, and then probably after scouring Chicago and getting turned down by Oprah and Lou Piniella, you're stuck with us. So anyway, thank you. We look forward to your questions. I think one thing I wanted to say was Tim brought up the sort of similarities between what you do and what we do. John did as well. I think one of the things that struck me most over the last couple of days is some of the things that you're dealing with are also what we're dealing with right now as an industry, at least in the print world. We're struggling to stay relevant to our consumers, our readers, like you are to yours. How do you produce products that are timely, are relevant, aren't old, and don't look stale by the time your consumers get them? That's exactly what we're doing now. We put out a paper that many people, that produces news that many people know already by the time they read it in the morning. So just from our own organization, what we're struggling to do now is how do we still put out a paper product, because we will continue to for some time, but at the same time put our best reporting up early on the web, and then at the same time not make it look, the paper look stale. So what we try to do is have as forward-looking a product the next day as we can. The leads of our story change. Their analysis, they do become more analytical. It's not this happened yesterday. It's this happened. This is what happened yesterday means for you as a reader, and it's actually kind of interesting. And I think one of the exciting things about our industry right now is that no one really knows what's going to happen or what it's going to look like in the next 5 or 10 years. There's a lot of gloom and doom out there because financially the numbers look bad. People are, reading less and subscribing certainly to papers more. And why would you subscribe to the New York Times when you can read it online for free? So these are all the interesting things and the economics that are shaking out now. But I just wanted to make that point because I think that you, with all the things you're doing with A-Space and Intellipedia, and instead of just spending 6 months on a subject and then producing an NIE that is your judgment about a topic, you are trying to make your products fresher, more relevant, and ultimately better for your consumers, just like we are for ours. So that's the pitch, that we're a lot more similar than we are different, and so therefore you should all talk to us a lot. Especially if you're disgruntled. I'll leave my card, anyway.
Yeah, my name is Kevin Whitelaw. I'm a national security correspondent for U.S. News and World Report magazine. I associate myself with Mark's remarks right there. I'll leave my phone number too. No, I've been covering the community for about 7 years now, and as well as trying to juggle a number of other reporting tasks, including reporting about terrorism in Iraq. And so, what many of us in the media look at, the numbers of analysts and collectors inside the intelligence community, perhaps a little enviously, given that we are in an industry suffering from a lot of cutbacks, and we're all trying to figure out how to do more with a heck of a lot less. I'm sure that sounds familiar as well, but the numbers are even more depressing in some ways. It varies by news organization to some degree. The problem with going last is sort of a lot of the points I've written down here have already been covered. But as a weekly magazine, we have to also deal with existing in an online world, and so we struggle with both how to write weekly reports relevant in a news environment that changes hourly and often by the minute, and also how to do up to the minute reporting and run a website. And so listening to the kinds of ideas that have come up at the conference certainly strikes, it's a familiar tone, because it feels like what we're doing at U.S. News and what a lot of other organizations do. It's a lot of throwing spaghetti against the wall just to kind of see what sticks, because no one really can figure out where this one's going. And so, definitely get at least I definitely get the feeling, listening to the way people are describing it, no one yet knows where we're headed, so it's pretty hard to chart the course. So, trying a number of things, and I think you'll find that looking at what the media is doing to try to figure out how to be relevant, how to stay competitive in an environment is instructive as well, because as fast as we are trying to adapt, there's much more agile folks out there on their own adapting even faster. So anyone who runs a media website will tell you that one of the most important factors that drives the traffic is going to be whether the Drudge Report picks up your story or not, and that's every website is trying to get on that one thing. And so here's one unexpected way that people end up getting information. So that's an uncomfortable place for the media to be, as we're searching for a way to continue to be relevant and continue to be able to support ourselves and be a profitable, or at least not unprofitable, enterprise. So looking at the other thing that has been interesting is, ever the topic of open source intelligence comes up, is obviously, this is what we do and this is what we rely on. And so it's always interesting to hear how people look at doing open source in this world, because it's sort of, that's one of those things that it's always amazing to me that isn't sort of just part of hasn't always been part of the tradecraft in intelligence. So. Happy to take questions.
If you can fire up the questions while they're coming up, though, I'd like to just comment on that last. I think open source has been part of the analyst tradecraft for as long as I can remember. I know I was the first guy to bring a Reuters feed into DIA when we were first getting desktop computers and stuff like that. And I remember the comptroller said, "You want to bring a news feed into DIA?" And I said, "Don't think of it as a news feed. Think of it as 2,400 human reporters around the globe reporting 24/7, relatively unfiltered information." So Thank you very much for your remarks. They were right on, and I guess I will arbitrate the questions here, and somebody's highlighting them for me. So the most provocative, one that we should have anticipated, I'm sure you all did, has just come up, and I'm not going to point to anybody in the panel, so just speak up, let it be a free-for-all. The first question for the panel is, how do you justify publishing classified information received from your sources?
I'm happy to take that one, I guess. Two ways. One, I missed that too. Yeah. There are a couple ways that I do it. One is things are overclassified. Everybody knows that. So just because something's classified doesn't mean that people shouldn't know about it. Two, I never, ever don't take into account whether what I do will get someone killed, because people, quite frankly, have said to me, if you publish this, people are going to die. I totally take that into account. Or if they, and I've never done that, by the way. I don't know what I would do if I got into a situation where someone said, if you publish this, you're going to die, and I disagreed. It's hard for me to envision a scenario where that would be the case. But I take into account whether the value for the people who need to know about whatever the piece of information is, and I think, of course, the case of the warrantless surveillance program is a pretty interesting one. I agreed with what the Times did to publish that, because there were so many other questions raised about what our government should and shouldn't be doing to us, and it was worthwhile, I thought, and I thought they handled it fairly carefully, to publish that piece of information, because there were the gains, of course, from that program might be substantial in terms of our national security, but what about the ramifications for our society on the fact that we were doing that? And I don't have an answer as to whether that was right or wrong, but it was certainly a very, very, very relevant question. There have been other times where I published classified information because I knew that it was about to be unclassified. So that was an easy call. If it's going to be unclassified tomorrow, and I know it the day before, I don't see any reason not to publish that for that reason.
I'll take a stab at that too. I have been in situations where I did have classified information, did know things that were going on or classified that would endanger people's lives, would endanger operational security, and just not published. It's just not worth it. And not only am I a journalist, I'm an American as well. But yeah, there's you do have times always where you have to use your judgment. It's a subjective call. But in the end, there's two things. One is let's not forget whose classified information this is. In the end, this belongs to the people of the United States. It doesn't belong to because those of you who work for the government, work for the people of the United States. And in many cases, as we know, overclassification has become just such a gigantic problem that in a lot of cases, you have to put that out there because you have to let the people make their judgment. I think that's really important. Second of all, the people who give us the classified information are big boys and girls. They know what they're doing in a lot of cases. And the fact is that they take, in a lot of cases, particularly in the pre-war reporting, we wouldn't have been able to do without people talking to us. And these are people who've taken an oath to preserve and protect the Constitution of the United States, not the government of the day. And to them, disclosing the information that they disclosed was a matter of protecting and preserving the Constitution of the United States. That, for them, was preeminent. I know it's a very controversial question. There have been people who have lost their lives because journalists have disclosed classified information. I know there was a case about 9 years ago where some CIA assets in Asia died because of the disclosure of information by a very conservative newspaper that rails against the disclosure of classified information. But it's a very difficult question that those of us who cover the intelligence community, which, by the way, is the most difficult beat in Washington, D.C., I think, we wrestle with quite a lot.
Just one thing. I think also that what people don't realize, and I think should, is that these decisions are made, taken very, very seriously. And it's not, I think there's maybe an impression that we just sort of, press the send button and, the consequences be damned about what we do. I think when it's a call about classified information, especially, that if the government comes to us, because we'll always run by our story, we'll run by what we're reporting to a government agency and for comment always. And if they come to us and say the seriousness of what we're reporting and don't publish for this reason, these are decisions that are made at the highest levels after sometime months and months of debate. And I think another thing people don't realize is that there's a fair amount of horse trading that ends up going on in negotiations. A lot of times what you read in the paper or see on TV, or see on TV, is a third of what you actually know as reporters. But we've listened to the argument about why this stuff should not be printed, and we've taken it seriously and chosen not to publish it. So I just wanted to make the point that these are especially for something as serious. And I wasn't with the New York Times when the decisions were made to publish about the NSA program. But I know that, and as has been reported, that this was something that went over months and months of discussions, of very serious discussions at the highest level. So I don't know. I think it's something that we're conscious of and conscious of the seriousness of. And as John said, it's a balance that gets weighed every time.
Yeah, I guess I don't have much to add to what my colleagues have said, except to say that they're just about anyone who's covered this community has chosen at times on his or her own accord to not publish certain information because it's clearly too sensitive, it's clearly too risky to do that, and most other times. At least one of the intelligence agencies, if not more, does have a chance to make a case to us as to why we should or should not publish something. And I can tell you those things, as Mark said, nobody takes that lightly when you get a request not to publish. And so those are taken at the highest levels of any publication when that comes into play.
And can I just make one more point? There's examples of this all working very well. Those of us who have embedded with the military, and a lot of us, some of us in this panel, have over time, and then before the Iraq War, where you had 500 reporters embedding. In some cases, I was with a Marine headquarters unit. They brought us in before the war started. They showed us the entire war plan. They said, "This is what we're going to do. This is our plan. We're going to go here, here, here." And we plan to be in Baghdad in this period of time, and they said, don't publish this until after we've gone each step of the way. Once we're there, you can say we're here, but it helps you to know what our plan is, so you can judge its effectiveness. And I know of no instance where the ground rules were broken. And it worked very well, with the exception of when Geraldo drew his stick in the stand and then he got booted. So I guess that it's a self-policing thing.
Okay, thank you very much. There were several questions that were around that same topic, so I'm going to assume we've covered that issue right now. There's a next question up on the screen here. The panel can all read it. It can be interpreted a couple different ways. I'll leave it to you to interpret it, and that is, what are the problems that we, the IC, are not seeing?
I'll take a stab at that. That goes along with can I even skip ahead and bring in the second question, which has to do with somebody asked about proactive leadership regarding privacy protection and data mining. One problem that I think, first let me say, if you're talking about a problem set of all the things that you all worry about, you covered a lot of them in the past day and a half, and it's rather impressive. It seems, the breadth of issues that you obviously know are before you and that you're trying to address. Everything from avian flu to Iraq to terrorism. I do think that this issue of privacy protection actually is something that I'm surprised I haven't seen more attention given to in the intelligence community, more of a concerted effort. on research, on policy making. Certainly the ODNI and Homeland Security and various offices have set up civil liberties and privacy protection offices. It hasn't really done much, though, to reassure the public or diminish the ferocious debate that's going on around things like the NSA program or like airline passenger screening or any number of other various programs that are out there right now. So, I think that really is one issue that I know is being addressed, but I think could be taken even more seriously because, everyone has been talking about how the intelligence community is aware of the excesses of the past and, the days of COINTELPRO, and nobody wants to go back to that. And it's sort of, it's taken almost for granted that no one wants to go back to that. But I think that there needs to be perhaps more of an obvious effort to make sure that doesn't happen. I think that would probably go a long way towards possibly reassuring the public about a lot of the work the intelligence community does. And I would imagine that probably would reassure some lawmakers as well. That's one problem that I haven't seen addressed sufficiently.
One question I might raise, and it's something that I don't get the sense that comes up very often as an idea inside the community, but I think that certainly one of the things that makes our job interesting is anytime we write something, it's out there for anybody to see, and we certainly hear back a lot, and that makes us work that much harder. I'd be interesting for me to hear a discussion about why the intelligence community doesn't think about figuring out ways to put more of their work out in the public realm when possible for this purpose, to try to make the analysis, to make the analytical tools used to make the thought processes stronger. The argument, one of the many arguments aside from the secrecy one, there's things you could write about that where that would not be an issue or less of an issue. One of the ones is that people are concerned it would sort of dull the sharpness of the analysis, that analysts would be sort of more careful about how they express themselves. And it seems to me that any intelligence analyst worth his or her salt isn't going to sort of hedge anything when they're writing, especially in a public arena where they know it's going to be read by all of their peers. So I'm not quite sure I understand that particular argument against it, but always interested that it just almost never gets discussed.
Well, we'll go to anybody else on that question? Okay, we'll go to the next one. Let me tell the group. What would you, as professionals who gather and assimilate facts, tell the IC how to improve analytic reporting? And corollary there is, what parallels does the panel see in transformation of their industry compared to ours?
I'll start with the first part. It's a difficult question because, to tell you the truth, we don't really see the vast bulk of your analytical reporting. Because, and what we do see, and I got to really compliment ODNI for this, is the most recent, I guess since January, the key judgments that that have been made public on 2 NIEs on Iraq and the NIE on the terrorist threat to the homeland, which I applaud you for. I think it's a great thing. But for the most part, we don't see the bulk of your reporting because once it gets to the policymakers, well, you know what happens to it. I mean, if they don't like what they're seeing, we don't find out, as the public, don't find out about it, unless, of course, we get a leak of classified information. Perhaps one of the things that makes, I've come to, listening to this and my experience in Washington, is I've come to believe that some of us in the press are a hell of a lot more nimbler than you guys in the intelligence, than your analysts in the intelligence community, because we don't just do analysis, we collect as well, whereas you've got collectors and you've got various types of collections, and it all gets filtered down to the analysts, who then have to go and go through that and then do their analysis and draw their conclusions. Whereas for me, let me give you a real fast example, and from my own personal experience. I spend a lot of time in Afghanistan and Pakistan. It's kind of my area of expertise. And last August, before I went, I always like to do the rounds of my sources, and I found out about these negotiations that the Pakistani regime was doing with the so-called tribal leaders in the federally administered tribal areas, which weren't tribal leaders at all, but were in fact members of the Taliban, Pakistani and Afghani, and wrote a story about that before I went. And then once I got to Kabul, in the middle of last August, I started hearing from people there about how this thing was already failing before it had even been signed, that they had started seeing a flow of insurgents from the tribal areas, particularly Waziristan, coming back into the Afghan side of the border in anticipation that this thing was going to be signed because of the quid pro quo with the Musharraf regime, which was don't attack the Pakistani army, but it's okay to go over the other side and do jihad over there. And I wrote that story and came back to absolute ridicule from people in the State Department and other parts of the government about how can you write this already? You know, they've just signed the thing. Well, look what happened. We all know now, and it's been acknowledged both by state and by the IC, that this thing was a total and complete failure. But how long did it take for the government to reach the conclusions that I reached in about two weeks of reporting in Kabul and in Afghanistan and Pakistan? So perhaps there's a problem here with the way you do things, where the system has been set up. Perhaps you need to have more collectors who are also analysts, and more analysts who are also collectors. I don't know what the answer there is. I'm not an intelligence professional, but all I know is that there have been many cases where we in the press just seem to be nimbler than the intelligence community is.
Any other comments on those questions?
On the parallels of the industry, there was a question of, is this on? What parallels do we see in the transformation of our industry compared to yours? And you know, one thing I noticed is that a lot of what you all are talking about is how do you provide analysis that a decision maker can take and can use to make a decision, and the quality of the analytic product being one that you're not necessarily giving answers, but perhaps you're laying out possible options or possible scenarios, putting things in context. And I think in the news business right now, particularly with us as print journalists competing against, in some cases, cable news outlets that are on 24/7, there's a question of whether or not our job is to provide context and nuance and give people information so they can make up their own minds and decisions, or to simply come out and give them easy answers and quick facts to digest, put things in black and white, or even to opine. And there's sort of a tension going on right there as I see it. 24/7 cable news outlets, I think, tend to fall into that category often of trying to come in very quickly, define a situation, get out, move on to the next thing, whereas we in the print media, and especially in the weekly media, are trying to take a longer view, look ahead, give something perhaps more of substance that oftentimes maybe it is murkier, maybe it is more ridden with nuance than some viewers would like. I sense that same sort of tension is being talked about here today, where are you trying to create analytic products that give certain answers, or are you trying to create a product that informs a decision maker to then go off and do what he's supposed to do, which is make a decision? Those two things that have struck me as parallels, and I'm not sure I really know the answers, but it does seem that some of the same angst that I hear just in talking to people at the conference is something that I sense certainly in the newsroom about what our job is as providers of information to the public.
Well, and the other thing about that is that the internet in particular has really changed the way people take in the information that we put out. And there's certain things that work really well on the internet, and there's certain things that don't. And one of the things that you definitely figure out very quickly is that short pieces work better than long pieces almost all the time online. And print has obviously is a more flexible format for different kinds of work. And I think there'll be implications for that down the line in terms of the way intelligence products would need to be conceived of and designed, because people take in information differently.
And I think I'm in a slightly different situation than some of these folk up here. CQ does all of we do the weekly, we do the daily, and we do the web. So in addition to being able to give the long view, then being able to give the day after view with some of the analysis, we also are doing the instant. I mean, literally sometimes with CQ, the second a bill passes, you get an email alert saying that this is what just happened. And there are things I complain about with my employer, but I think one of the things that they've done pretty well is figuring out a way to provide all those things all at once. So I feel like our transformation is something that maybe other media outlets might be able to learn from. And there are some other media outlets that have started doing what we've done and tried to do it cheaper. And therefore, we have to find a new thing to do, or we have to do it better than them. And I think another thing that is to our advantage, of course, is that we have a pretty targeted market. I mean, the Washington community wants to have an outlet for what Congress is doing, and therefore they're really interested in what we're going to report about it. There is competition, but oftentimes, we're going to beat all the other publications, including CNN, because we have someone who's at the event, and an email is being sent out to everyone who's a subscriber to that service, and they're getting it right that second, and then they can get the other stuff later. I think another thing that maybe is worth considering, and I wish that more media outlets were doing this, is transforming in a way where we're not just providing that quick hit and that weekly, but even also doing more in-depth investigative reporting. And that's a really good use of resources, because that's something that we can do that no blogger's going to do, that no television station is going to spend as much time on. And that's a really hard sell to editors, because they think about, oh, we've got to fill this newspaper today, we need to have something for our readers on this subject right now. It's hard to break off that time, but I think that's actually a pretty good money-making model, is if you're investigating something so deeply that no one else can even touch it, you're providing something that's so unique that it has to sell.
If I could follow on that point too, one thing that I think that your industry, if you want to call it that, your profession doesn't have that we are marked by, it's competition. I mean, I know that there is competition to an extent within the intelligence community on the analytical level, but I've never seen any kind of systematic approach to really implementing competitive analysis across the IC. I mean, we are, all of us, when we're colleagues, but we're all competing against each other to get the same information. We're now having to compete with blogging and citizen journalism and the like and all of that. But within your community, I mean, there is a set number of you, and you are really talking amongst each other, obviously, and to your specific audience. But that competitive sort of drive, and that almost like an axe hanging over your head sometimes is something that's not really present in the IC. And I've talked to a lot of people over the years on the topic of intelligence reform who say competition is a good thing, and it is something that you should be striving to do and implementing in more formal ways. And there are various policies for doing that, and there are pockets where it's happening. But that defines our industry for sure in a way that I think it does not define your profession right now.
This is probably a pretty good follow-on question to that. What are the consequences of a media failure? You can see what's implied in that, where you get a story wrong, or you get scooped, or you fail in other ways.
Jonathan correctly tooted his own horn about the lead up to Iraq. I mean, McClatchy's reporting was incredible on that, but a lot of other papers got it wrong. So it wasn't, I mean, I think as an industry we had the advantages that he described, but I also think that a lot of us made the same mistakes that everyone else made. And I didn't cover the lead up, so when I say a lot of us, I mean the general we. The consequences might be that if only one publication is really doing a really good job on the lead up to that war, and I know there were other publications that did a good job. McClatchy was at the forefront, but there were other publications as well that did a pretty decent job of poking some holes. There were a few. Walter Pincus in the Washington Post on page A13. But there wasn't as much of it as there should have been, and I think the media took a deserved hit for not having questioned enough of those assumptions. I think that we have ourselves to blame in some ways for the invasion to Iraq happening the way it did. And maybe if we had been better at our jobs, we could have stopped that from happening. I'm not saying that the war was just or unjust. I'm just saying that if we had been more skeptical in our reporting of the weapons programs as an industry, then we might be in a better place in terms of what's going on in Iraq now.
Yeah, I think the consequences of a media failure, which is a good way to put it, are pretty dire, especially in this area that we cover. There has been a lot of soul searching and hand wringing in the media world, just like there was in the intelligence world, about how the lead up to the Iraq War was covered. And I think just like the intelligence community, the media, or at least news organizations, have tried to put safeguards in place and try to change things the way they do business to keep that from happening again. The New York Times now has something called a public editor, which is supposed to be someone who is the watchdog of the reporters, to question publicly the reporting in the paper's own pages. And that's not, he's not necessarily the most popular person at the paper. But that doesn't mean he shouldn't be there. And I think that and a lot of other, the Post has had an ombudsman for quite a while. And I think that they're good things. How we handle anonymous sources, and not just we at the New York Times, I think in general, the way we handle anonymous sources, who knows about anonymous sources has changed. Editors have to know who our sources are. But that being said, I know there's a lot of talk and criticism about the use of anonymous sources, that why do we use them? And I think the simple answer is that it's not going to change, and it can't change, nor should it change. I think you have to be judicious in how you use anonymous sources, but if you cover military intelligence, you're not going to get any stories that beyond what the public affairs people want you to write if you don't use anonymous sources. And so, we believe our readers are better served by us using anonymous sources as long as you're careful how you do it.
You've got a choice to hold the media accountable for its failures. You can turn the television off, you can switch the channel, you can cancel your subscription to the newspaper or magazine that has pissed you off. You've got that ability to do that. Let me just, an interesting experiment here. How many of you here watch Fox News? Okay, do you remember what they were reporting before the war? Why are you still watching them? Why are you still watching them? Okay.
Maybe things would be a little more popular if you weren't so predictable. If you were.
Thank you. If you were to take a different approach of being less authoritative and maybe more curious, let me give you an example. It's very predictable for you to report there's not going to be any WMDs when we get in there. What would have been interesting if you say, I wonder
We didn't report that.
I wonder where they went.
We didn't report that. We reported that there was no solid evidence to back up the claims. We didn't say they weren't there. But again, Fox News was categorically saying there were WMD in Iraq, and yet you're still watching.
Well, the world, as far as I know, I'm not a reporter, but the world, as far as I know, has always agreed that there have been WMDs in Iraq. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, until the UN got in there.
All right. So did the matter just go away?
Something happened.
That's the curiosity
Right.
that we would love to see you have.
Well, we did. Some of us did, but we don't have a newspaper in Washington or New York.
About 30 minutes ago, you made the claim they weren't there. Authoritatively.
No.
Authoritative.
I said
Replay the tape.
I said Saddam Hussein's son-in-law made the claim they weren't there. They'd gotten rid of them. I never made that claim.
You were saying
what
that
I
you were
reported was
reporting otherwise.
that there was no solid evidence to back up the claim that it was there.
And that's what's
that's
predictable.
different.
That's what is predictable rather than the curiosity
that's what the
that
reporting
would be
that's
of
what-
use to us.
That's where the reporting took us.
Well,
I think
appreciate
I better moderate this. We've only got a couple of minutes left, and there's a question that was up on the screen. It just disappeared. There it is for the speakers. Are transformation issues, analytic or otherwise, sexy enough for Congress and the public? For example, from your perch, is the attention to this subject temporary until something more exciting comes along, or do you see it taking deeper root? What is your impression, and how does it affect your coverage? It's a great question as really the last question.
I've been writing about intelligence reform for 3-4 years. I mean, really, and since the term went into fashion, and maybe in some forms even before that. I think it depends on the publication. We're going to be driven by the news cycle. We're going to be driven by the demands of our audience. I know for the audience of National Journal, these issues of transformation, of intelligence reform, they're policy matters policy issues that matter deeply to members of Congress, to people in the executive branch, to people in the media. So I think that, are you going to see this, on headline news? No. Is Larry King going to do an hour on analytic transformation? Probably not. But is that really the audience you want to be speaking to anyway? I mean, don't you want this to be channeled through a more sort of specific kind of perhaps even meaningful publication that targets the people that you're trying to reach and that will take the time to explore it? I mean, I know for me, I've been covering this topic for quite some time, and I find it really fascinating, and I am very curious, and I try and bring that level of curiosity to my work. It's going to depend on the individual's publications, and but I don't think that you should worry about the issue, fading in importance just because, again, it's not being perhaps covered on the front page of every newspaper.
And I'm desperately interested in this issue, or I wouldn't be here. But I do think that in some ways, if you look at the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, for instance, all the big publications did a lot of in-depth reporting following up on whether the creation of that entity was working, whether it was doing what it should be doing. And I don't feel like there's been quite as much on the intelligence community. And that's just from a reporting standpoint. I've tried to change that. I'm working harder to change that. And the fact that my editors let me come here when they haven't sponsored very much travel before is an indicator that they might be more open-minded than I thought they were when I was telling them, we've got to write about this. And they weren't letting me do it as much as I wanted. But again, the National Journal and CQ Weekly are fairly similar publications in the regard that I know that the people I talk to from the standpoint of what I believe to be our readers are very interested in the issue. That said, Congress has not done nearly enough follow-up, I don't think, to what happened after the Intelligence Reform Bill of 2004 passed. They did another 9/11 Commission bill just a few months ago, or actually a month or two ago. But it really didn't address much of the intelligence issues that are remaining, the substantial intelligence issues that are remaining. So I think it's already in some ways faded from the broader public view, and in some ways from the standpoint of Congress and the media faded a little bit, despite Shane's excellent commitment to the issue. I think that they're more the exception than the rule. I would actually like to see more reporting on the issue, and I would like to see Congress paying more attention to the issue.
Well, from a general reporting perspective, I'd have to say that for general audiences, the process stories are, just tend to be less interesting for them. So, and I don't think this is necessarily an issue that the press is going to be driving, at least the mainstream press, quite as much. I did want to just mention one thing about the media failure question, because it is a good question, and say that if you look at the cutbacks in the newsrooms, you look at people, the media organizations that are closing foreign bureaus, we probably have fewer sort of reporters overseas than there have been in a long time in terms of sort of American reporters overseas. I do think that when you look at the cuts that news organizations have been making across the board almost in terms of reporting resources, I don't see how that doesn't increase the odds of a media failure.
Let me do a quick answer to this. We do report on this actually all the time, but in a sort of subtly different way, I think. Every story we write about the debate on FISA, every story we write about the warrantless wiretapping, monitoring program, every story we write about interrogation policy, every story we write about the intelligence budget really in a way goes to transformation and whether or not it's going on. And it contributes to the debate, to the popular debate.
I was overruled by Mr. Sample. We'll allow one or two more questions from the floor. I see we have one right up front here. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, during the last half hour, 40 minutes, none of the panelists have ever said the word technology, and yet you've been here for the last 2 days where they said, well, technology is the key to better intelligence analysis. In your view, is technology even an issue to do better intelligence analysis?
Definitely.
I mean, you don't talk about your word processors, you don't talk about your news production systems, you don't talk about your text archives. Does that really help?
Well, you're talking about technology's role in improving analysis, as you're saying. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, certainly I can't all go back to my reporting I've been doing for the past 5 years on reform issues. I started out as a technology reporter. That's how I got into doing Intel and Homeland. And after 9/11, we were all looking for, okay, well, what happened, what went wrong, what led to this disaster? And there were clear that there were technological issues in play, and that's how I just segued into the beat. It's sort of the most impressive, undertakings with technology. I mean, all the whiz-bang stuff that we're talking about, it's never going to replace the analyst. And I don't hear anybody here saying that, which is something that's really notable. No one here is saying, well, we need to build machines to do what human beings can't. You're talking about trying to create programs and machines and systems to do a lot of the heavy lifting to let human beings do what they do well or what they do best, which is to use instinct and experience and understanding and apply that to the problems. You know, I mean, for me, again, writing about the reform issue, IT is sort of embedded in it, you know, as just it's a given. It will have to go along with it. But I don't really know anybody who has said, certainly within much credibility, oh, it's the answer to all the problems. But I mean, certainly it is right there in the toolbox at the heart, really, of what you're talking about at this conference right now.
I think that's why I've skipped over it some, because I would say that's easily the thing that you guys have done the best job of talking about. So don't have much to add. And I do think that I mean, I wrote something last summer about Intellipedia, A-Space, all of it. I wrote a magazine piece about it, but it was a short magazine piece. The cover story I just did a month or two ago was about the people element, because everybody I was talking to who was paying attention to what was going on in the intelligence world was saying, it don't make a lick of difference if you don't have the right people in the jobs doing their jobs well, being trained well, and keeping them in their jobs. So my focus has tended to be on that side of things and policy. Technology is hugely important to it, but you guys have covered the hell out of it, so I didn't have much to add.
Okay, one more question right up front here. Mike's coming. Oh, okay, we'll break the rules again in the back.
I actually had one question going back to the earlier discussion we had about newspaper report or press reporters printing, quote, secrets. Why is the press willing, and journalists individually, willing to go to jail for months on end to protect a source, but yet they are unwilling to listen to people in the intel community talk about the need to don't print that because you need to protect a source, not just because someone may die, but for the very same reason the press has, is that the willingness of foreign governments and or foreign individuals to share information with us is reduced if we're unable to keep that information confidential.
I'd go back to the points we were making. I mean, I think that's a valid thing to take into account when you're thinking about publishing classified information. But it's all part of a mix of what you take into account. And the lives issue is an important one. The one you brought up was an important one. But it's not the only thing to take into account. It's got to be that balance that we've been discussing.
I'm willing to go to jail to protect the source because that's all I've got in terms of my credibility and my value as a journalist is my ability to protect the people who I give my personal guarantee and professional guarantee to that I'm not going to disclose their identities. I owe it to them. And the fact is that we, the press, the media, I think if you go back and you look at the record, I think the record would probably come out on our side. We would not have found out as Americans about Watergate. We would not have found out as Americans about the abuses that took place in the 50s and the 60s and the so-called family jewels of the CIA. We would not have found out about the Pentagon Papers and how this country was being misled by its political and military leaders about what was happening in Vietnam. We would not have found out about pre-war intelligence. I think if you tell me and hold up on the other side of the ledger examples where there have been national catastrophes, existential catastrophes, threats to the existence of the United States that have occurred as a result of the leak of classified information to a journalist. I challenge you to find one that is as of such grave importance as the examples that I just held up to you of where leaks have actually contributed to the strength of our country as a democracy. Our democracy is based on, in part, the flow of information that empowers our citizenry to make informed choices when it comes to voting in an election, because that is basically the only impact they have on setting a course that affects their lives and the lives of the people they love. And the fact is that the more information, accurate information, that they have about their government and what the government is doing in their name is empowers them to make an informed choice. And the big danger, one of the gravest dangers facing our country today is not as almost as much as the terrorist threat, which I would love to have a side debate on people who think that Osama bin Laden is an existential threat to this country, and is more of an existential threat to this country than the Russian nuclear armory still is. But is what's happening to our business today. The consolidation that's taking place in the American news industry, the closure of foreign bureaus, all of that, the consolidation in news outlets, the reliance on greater and greater on superficial 24-hour news television is undermining our democracy because of that constriction that's taking place on the free flow of information.
Last question.
Thanks. I don't watch Fox News. I don't watch any cable news just because there's too much of it, like you just said, going on. A lot of it's superfluous. So I rely on the technology, such as dig.com, somebody that's going to allow me to use my social network to go out there and find the most important stuff that I want in the fields that I'm interested in. As members of the press, how do you address that, and how do you make sure that if you have something that you think is really important, how have you adopted these technologies and made sure that it rises to the top of something like dig.com, or that your story, if it's really that important, gets out there to the top?
I don't think most reporters spend that much time. There probably are some, but a lot of us don't spend time on that. At least I'm too busy reporting and writing my stories to worry about what happens to it. But you're right. That's something that I think media organizations are trying to figure out, partly for the revenue model. I think the concern that I would have in terms of what the new technologies and what the web world has meant for the news environment in general is that it does help. It makes it even easier for people to go find news sources that tell them things that reinforce what they already believe, rather than challenging them in ways that might actually change their mind. And I think that's been true to a certain degree in cable news, but it's especially true online. And I think, you look at how the mainstream press has become a dirty word in a lot of circles, and as part of the mainstream press, I didn't think that, I had never thought of that as a bad thing to be in particular. But obviously, when you have a situation where the media's credibility is more and more in doubt, I think part of it is that people can go find whatever news they want, whatever is most convenient for them to believe, because there's a site out there that will tell them what they want to hear.
I think that's a very, sorry, go ahead.
Again, because I'm in a slightly different publication than these gentlemen who can see most of their work online for free, I do have to spend a little more time than I would like making sure that people see what I write. So I send some of my stuff to other reporters. I send some of my stuff to blogs. I send some of my stuff to experts in the field. And that's really one of the only ways people are going to know that I even exist, unless, I could cold call people all day, but I wouldn't get real far unless they knew that I was good at what I did and had attained a reputation as someone who was doing meaningful or important or interesting work. So, I use the blogs in some ways to do that. There are some reporters who have their own blogs at my publication. I don't think they're supposed to, so don't tell anyone. But there's some reporters who have their own blogs where they post their work so that anyone can go to it. And then I think this, I may be slightly wrong in asking this question the way you do. I do use some of those tools, those technology tools that you're talking about, to help my reporting. I have news alerts set up anytime the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee is mentioned. I get an email. So I know what he's doing. I know what his hometown paper is saying about him, which he's saying stuff to his hometown paper that he ain't saying to me, because he has to get reelected there and wants everybody to know what he's doing and how cool it is, but he doesn't want everybody to know. So, and I do spend a fair amount of time reading the blogs, even though I know that a lot of them are biased, and it is a big problem for our industry to look at blogs, sometimes not advancing news, but advancing an agenda. But sometimes that's a good, quick way for me to find out what the average right-wing partisan or left-wing partisan is thinking. I know that there are blogs that are going to reflect that in some ways. They're not going to reflect everybody. So I can't just look at a blog and go, this is what Republicans think. But it can help, and it can also help shape my questions. There are questions that bloggers will raise sometimes that other reporters it might not come naturally to them to ask, because we're not always coming from, I would say, hardly ever coming from a partisan perspective, of going, gosh, what's the libertarian perspective on this? And in this particular case, is the libertarian question the smart question to ask next time you're out? Do we need to be doing this? I mean, that's just an example, because there are other counterexamples that are the exact same way, where what's the democratic perspective on this, or what have you. So I use it both input and output, but there's some ways that I wish I didn't have to use it at all. If I was working for a different publication, it might be a different situation.
And I think that what's interesting these days, is this on?
No. Yes.
That the blogs shape how people read stories. I mean, most of the email I get on a story is, I don't think from readers in the newspaper or from the website. It's a story gets linked to a blog, either right wing or left wing, and that shapes how people read the story. And what's actually really funny is you'll get equal amounts of hate mail from both sides about the same story, and because people read the way they want to read it. I mean, on the same story, someone will either call you a traitor who hates America. The same people will say you're a shill for the Bush administration, and all you're doing is reporting what they want you to say. And so, it's the exact same story that a blog has posted on their site and sort of said, you made their own commentary. So, I mean, it is what it is. It's not necessarily a good or bad thing, but it also it's interesting how that's another filter, but through which our stories get read.
I'm learning all about RSS feeds and Delicious and Digit. Not Digit. What's the other one? I forget the other. Yeah, that's it. We're doing things. I mean, we've been involved. The reporters at McClatchy, we've been involved in sort of brainstorming these issues. One of the things we've done now is Yahoo is now got links to McClatchy, and it's to our website in Washington, www.mcclatchydc.com, in case anybody's interested. But in the end, what I think it really comes down to is the same thing that we've been doing since the invention of the press, of the news media, and it's this. We're talking about platforms here. We're talking about ways to distribute information. But when I write, or Mark writes a story that's an exclusive story, that's powerful, that has meaning to both to our country and to the world, you don't need the technology to attract readers to that story. It is going to make it, people are going to find it. The same way as you're talking about how you don't need to drive, you don't need to have these incentives for agencies to participate in your new online A-Space and that kind of thing. They're going to want to go in there. They're going to want to use the information there. I think in the end, the same thing applies to us.
That's a very provocative and I think poignant insight from a panel who were all volunteers. I'd like to thank you very much and for being here.